All right, John, it's good to have you back again. So,
Hey.
uh, I'm not gonna ask you to introduce yourself. We've done this multiple times. So, you were an NFL athlete before, right?
Yep.
And it's like somewhere around 10 years ago. So, in your opinion, how did the game change so far? When you're an athlete and the game now, have it been changed?
Referencing like the game of football or like
Yeah,
the
the
fans
game
of
in football.
football. I would say it's probably, this you've been on like this kind of continuum, even going back to like the 90s to 2000s. I'd say that the games continuously just getting faster. Not to say that there weren't aspects of some of these guys that existed back then, because there were. You got your Julius Peppers and guys like that, but there's so many. It's like you see so many defensive ends and outside linebackers running 4.4s and 4.5s these days. And when you used to see that stuff, you used to be like, "Whoa, that's crazy." But now there's 4 or 5 guys at every single combine running it too.
Yeah.
And I'm sure guys are coached up more efficiently to run 40s now too. But I think the game ultimately is just getting a lot faster. And then I think that there's a big precedence of like health and wellness as it pertains to like guys taking care of their body in the game right now. And I feel like LeBron really kind of pushed that shift throughout sports of like publicly saying how much money he put into his body. And I'm sure there may have been some other guys doing the same thing. It just wasn't as publicized. But you're starting to see that trickle down effect and carry over to other sports too. Like guys are really investing in their bodies, investing in the off season, investing in recovery modalities. You're seeing a lot of that, so much so that it's almost becoming saturated that you almost have to provide some sort of education in terms of like, this works, that doesn't work, call around and ask about this. But I would say that's changed a lot. Like back then, we just had foam rollers, cold tubs. And I didn't play that long ago, but I'm just thinking about things that I remember guys doing. Like maybe a couple guys had a hyperbaric chamber. But nowadays everyone has a PT, a body work guy, MAT therapy. Like everyone's doing it, like a lot of stuff these days. It's really cool.
Nice. So, like you mentioned, probably a lot of the pro player, like professional like football player, they have their own like PT, they have their own like strength coach during the summer. So how do you like handle those situations when they come back to training and probably sometimes the stuff you did or the stuff you do are gonna be different than the stuff they do.
Yeah. I mean, the phrase goes, there's 1,000 different ways to skin a cat. Like there's a bunch of different ways to build strength, to train an athlete, to get a guy in shape. So ultimately when guys come back, we just want to make sure that they're starting off from a foundation of zero, just not minus. You know what I'm saying? As long as the guy's not grossly out of shape, hasn't been doing anything, cardiovascularly is just so far from where we need him to be. We can get a pretty good head count in terms of where we want to progress most of these athletes. Now, as far as them doing different types of training, I think it's cool. I think it's good for them to have a little bit of undulation in the style that they train. If they were to do what we did 24/7 all year round, I don't know if that would necessarily be the best thing for them. And even early on when they come back, like we want to avoid monotony. Like we're trying to implement new things within our training. We're not getting too far away from things we hang our hat on as well.
Cool, cool. So you mentioned that the game has gone like a lot faster. Do you think that's why like there are more and more like Achilles tendon injury or like even ACL or like hamstring?
Yeah. I think that the windows of time off are very inefficient in the NFL. And I know this happened a long time ago with the CBA, but the time off going in season, like there's just it breeds these environments for like acute spikes of workload, acute spikes of volume. And you're seeing a lot of that stuff in the data pop up. And whether it be training camp, OTAs, or just quarter 1 of the season, you're seeing these acute spikes of just like rapid foot contacts, practice volumes, densities, frequency. And I just don't think guys are used to it. So you're seeing kind of like an increase of that. On top of that, like obviously, guys are in cleats a lot. You'll see some guys, they'll play all the way from you go back to OTAs April through January, if you make a deep run in the playoffs late January. And some guys are in cleats again in February. Cleats and turf, you know what I mean? So it's just not giving the body a time off. And then I think there's such an infatuation these days with some of the velocity-based training, some of the power modalities, some of the rate of force development stuff. And I think all that's great, and there's a time and place for it. But some of the long, loaded, eccentric stuff is critical too, and that can be boring. And in a way, it can almost seem counterintuitive because athletes like, no, I want to train fast, I want to go, I want to be explosive, and that's good. But like if they're doing that on the field and they're doing that a lot, like there needs to be something that exists to counteract that and to balance those things out. And I think that pendulum's just kind of it's swinging very far so to one side right now.
Nice, nice. I feel like I'm talking to Andrew Hall right now
That's
because
my
he
guy,
actually, yeah,
man.
he
Yeah,
actually said the exact same thing last year when we talked.
that makes me feel good about what I said there, man. There we go. AP is like
Man,
the beginning of training, so if AP says it, it's true for me.
so like you mentioned, there's a huge spike in training load when it comes like I think it's probably in every sport right now.
Yeah.
So how do you guys handle that?
Yeah, I think one, the education, not necessarily just the education to the players, but the education to the organization. The fact that in our space that injury data is public really does help because you can say, hey, this is happening across the league with all 32 teams over the last 3, 4 years. This is what we're seeing. We're seeing an increase of spike. We're seeing increased injuries with these specific body parts during this time frame. Here's a potential solution that we feel like can mitigate these things. And once a coach kind of sees that, a lot of times, like they obviously want a team to be healthy. And at the end of the day, their job is to train a football team and get a football team prepared to play the season. But availability is a big part of that. So implementing things like ramps, constraints on practice times, constraints on themes of days, whether it's a low, medium, high, and pairing drills or practice things with those things. Like, hey, let's sit down and figure out what nuances of a low practice, like what things do we want to include in a low football practice? Is that red zone, short yardage? We got to move the ball on a high practice. What does that look like? Is it two spot where we have two fields going at the same time? Is it more third and long, so working more deep shots? Like we're figuring out, but like I think just building that connection with the coach and understanding the language, and then getting them to think like a performance coach, you can kind of bridge that gap and make that a better environment.
Nice, nice. So, you kind of mentioned that a lot of like the injury data are publicly available right now. So, so I heard about this like I think it's with Dari, and I think a lot of the NFL team have Dari or whatever like sports science technology you guys have. According to what they say, is like a lot of players are not willing to do those stuff because they feel like those data are probably gonna use against them.
Yeah.
So how do you deal with like these mindset? How do you communicate with that?
Yeah, I mean, I think first the players got to kind of trust you. Like obviously you work as a performance coach or a practitioner, you work for the organization. But at its core, like you're there to service the players. And you're a resource for them. And they got to know that you're all in for them. And everything that we're trying to do is trying to maximize their capacity and their ability to be the best version of themselves every single day, especially on Sundays. If guys truly feel that way, then when you're talking about tracking data and making it public and showing them and communicating with them, they're open to it. But if there's hesitancy behind that and a guy doesn't think you may have his best interest in mind and you're just poking and prodding and collecting all this data, I'm sure part of it, there's a little skepticism involved in terms of like, what are they doing with that? Is that going to hurt me? No, I don't want to do that. So I think just having open lines of communication, clear, honest communication in terms of like, hey, this is what we're trying to do. This is what we're trying to look at, and this is how it's going to ultimately help improve what you're doing.
So since like I feel like there are technology everywhere in like D1 school, does that also help when player go to like or like pro sport? Does that like having let's say force plate, catapult when they're in college, does that also help the communication?
Yeah, because they have familiarity and proximity to it. It's not the first time they've ever done it. Now, obviously, like data, depending on how it was tracked, what the context of it is, what the constraints, who is the practitioner, that can be very messy in terms of carrying that data over. But just athletes having proximity and a reference to that stuff early on in their college careers, when they get to NFL, it makes it a lot easier. Because like, oh, I've done this before. I've done this a million times.
Cool, cool. So I'm gonna go back to like the Achilles tendon injury. So like we talk about, there's more and more like these type of injuries. So And Adam Petway just published a research about like injury prior to Achilles tendon tear. So
Yeah.
I think the main injury prior to that is like calf strain or like Achilles tendinopathy.
Yeah.
So and we could kind of talk about those before. So how do you guys handle like these injury?
Yeah. No, that's a good question. So we'll see more like tendonitis rather than tendinopathy in season. Now, with that said, both can exist in season. We'll probably treat them both the same. A lot of that intel has came from we just hired a PT, Nick Carapino, who's helped us build a lot of that out, along with Eric Jernstrom on our staff as well. But we're going to rely heavily on some of the literature is going to push towards ISOs. So we'll do kind of like push ISOs, yielding ISOs. We'll try to quantify it as much as possible on a force plate, and give guys multiple opportunities or windows of opportunity to do that, whether it be pre-practice, post-practice, pre-game day, post-game day. And that'll be sort of their rhythm that they do. And it happens more frequently than what's written on their typical schedule that everyone else goes through. I think a lot of times when you start seeing those calf injuries, guys are obviously not are apprehensive towards, lengthening and using the Achilles. So a lot of that is going to go up chain more muscular, and it's probably going to affect like gastroc a lot more too. So soft tissue, manual therapy work, getting them more comfortable. I think just trying to influence the environment before they go to practice in terms of does a guy feel good going out there? So I mean, stealing a lot of that stuff from a lot of bright people, a lot of Keith Barr stuff, Joe Cook stuff. Damon Harper's got some stuff out there as well. But trying to figure out, what we like, what works for us, what's repeatable, what can we execute at a high clip. Because at the end of the day, being able to execute it for me is where the money's at. Like I love information, I love research, I love design, but at the end of the day, who can execute it most effectively? So if we can't build a framework around it, I'm not a fan of it. But if we can, then awesome.
That's cool because I remember we were talking about like some stuff about like training and basketball is just so different with football because you got hundreds of guys in football, right? And basketball just 15 guys.
Yeah.
So in terms of like training football player, like how do you like I don't how do you like are you able to like individualize the training when it comes to like weight training or even like handling the like injury?
Yeah. So I think at its core, I speak about this a lot of times too, is like first and foremost for everyone on the roster. We'll have 90 guys in season that'll break down to 53 on the active roster and additional 17 practice squads. So you're looking for anywhere from 70 to 90 guys at a time. Uh, at its core, every single person needs to be able to do fundamental movement capacity that is required just from a human being, just from a general human being. And next, like as an athlete in any sport that requires movement. These are just foundational principles that we all need to possess. And then you take that one step further in terms of like, okay, I'm a football athlete that plays wide receiver. And then the next step would finally be like that pinnacle of individualization of like, these are movement strategies specific to me. Our general process is going to cover those first two. So like our program basically attacks the foundational aspect of those first two. Once we get that into play as a staff, we figure out, okay, we have a general framework that operates. We know it operates effectively. What are ways that we can now start building some legs into some of these individualized programs? So, like, hey, a guy that's on an individualized program has his program written, but there's three small nuances. But from a standpoint, if he understands the flow of a typical workout, hey, instead of this exercise, you're going to do this. Every Wednesday when we come in, you'll start your session with this. So first, I think the most important thing was like, let's build a foundational program that everyone understands, a framework that guys can be autonomous in and they can go through, they understand how it flows. And then you can start making small changes that are more individual to each guy. But if you don't have a framework that's autonomous, a guy is always going to be reliant on what I got next, what I got next. And when you talk about doing that with 90 guys, 70 guys, it's extremely hard to train everyone effectively.
Nice, nice. So, uh, I feel like I feel like football is so different than basketball because a lot of times when you think about training football players, it's trying to get them bigger, stronger, and faster, right? So, how do those like Gary Gray stuff, 3D map, or like those rotational stuff. How do you implement that into like your training philosophy?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm gonna steal a line that I got from Bob, and he probably Bobby Stroop, and he probably stole it from somebody else. Like strength is an expression. It's an ability to do stuff on the football field. We're not gonna objectify that to just like a squat or a counter movement jump or a body weight, height, and length. You know what I'm saying? You're just because you're 6'2", 240 does not mean that that strength necessarily shows up on the football field. So we're gonna try to like basically reverse engineer like what are the capacities that are needed with an athlete on a football field, whether that's change of direction, linear acceleration, decel. What are the capacities from the toe all the way up to the head that are required? Tibial, fibula, internal rotation. What does the ankle need to be doing? Hip internal, external rotation, ipsilateral T-spine rotation, cervical rotation. What are areas hinging that are required by athletes, and how are we making sure that this is in our program, in our training session, in our warm up, in our pre-practice prep? We're giving multiple windows of opportunity for athletes to address these because at the end of the day, when it comes to that stuff, like frequency is your friend. So we always want to make sure that like, hey, we're not losing sight of what's required as a football player. Like you said, there is an aspect of bigger, faster, stronger, and a requisite level of muscle that's required to play football. You got to be strong, but at the end of the day, like movement is critical. Especially as it relates to like the spine, the pelvis. Like, do we have movement capacity and literacy in all different planes when it comes to these body parts? And we're constantly auditing and checking our programming in terms of yes, no. We're trying to bring someone in to say, hey, fresh set of eyes. What are we missing? What are we not doing well? What can we do better? So I do a big push for our staff to try to bring someone in every year in training to try to figure that out. And we kind of sneak it in with either a seasonal intern, Bill Walsh, or just have somebody stop by. Had Jose Borgia come by, check us out. He did a really good job and just had him audit us. Like, hey, what did you see? What did we not do well? What are some things we could do better? And I remember he left saying like some of the foot and ankle stuff could get better. And I was like, thanks, man.
Cool. So I guess I want to backtrack a little bit. So what got you into like the Gary Gray stuff at the beginning?
Yeah, I would say I think Bobby Stroop. So I knew Bobby back in 2015. Obviously he was still Mahomes trainer, but prior to that, he was at APEC training thousands of athletes, and there were a lot of his athletes that he trained that went to Baylor, and they raved about him and raved about his training. So obviously, you hear that, you obviously want to make a point of contact. And I was in Dallas. I stopped by the facility, spoke with him, followed him on Twitter, and he put out a lot of really good content and just his philosophy behind training behind movement and behind strength, like I really agreed with. A lot of it was like, man, this is really cool. And then it turns out, like I figured out, like one of his mentors or people he got a lot of his intel from was Gary. So then that kind of got me into the Gary Gray world as well. And then when I went to the Rams, a lot of what they did on the athletic training side was influenced by Gary Gray as well. So that was just another point of contact to be like, basically solidified. Okay, I'm kind of on the right path with some of this stuff. So that's kind of how I got into that world.
Cool, cool, cool. So when you're at Baylor, is that the time you met Tom Barbeau?
Yeah. So I was at Baylor on two different occasions. I was at Baylor in 2015, 16. That was early before Tom. And then I came back in 2020. And that's where I met Thomas Barbeau.
Oh, so talk to me about like your journey in Baylor because we also you also mentioned before that I think is it the first time you're at Baylor you also met Pat
Yeah.
at that time?
Yeah, so my first experience at Baylor was an internship, and Pat Ivy was in Missouri. Kaz Gazadi was at Baylor at the time, and they had a really cool thing where they would basically do an intern swap for a week. So their interns would come to Baylor, our interns would go to Missouri, and we basically intern there for a week. So meet new faces, learn a different program, get some different references. That's how I met Andrew Paul at the time. He was on Pat Ivy's staff as well. So that was my first interaction with PI, and how I had met him early in the game. But that was a really cool experience that existed. I wish more colleges did that, but I thought that was really unique, and I thought it was pivotal. One for my networking, but two for my growth too, because as an intern, especially if you have any type of success, like you think like this is the only way to do things, and then you go to another team that's also having success, and you see like, okay, this is really cool watching another team do it a different way.
So there's only 1 week, but Is it kind of like you and Pat Ivy and Andrew Paul just kept the relationship like just until now?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, honestly, that's what it was. Like I made the week worth it. You know what I'm saying? I got kind of out of my shell to make sure that I networked with those guys, spoke with those guys. At the time, me and AP were very like-minded in terms of training philosophy. I actually helped coach a drill with him. I was assigned to one of the drills with him when we were there in the sand pit doing some plyo stuff. And I think we just gelled, and I kept in contact with him ever since. And then I remember when he made the transition to the NBA, asked him to come speak to us when we were with the LA Rams. We did a virtual talk. So I've just kind of kept in touch with him ever since.
Cool, cool. So you've been a pro football player, intern, strength coach, and now director of performance. So how do you think that like when you were a player and you're an intern, like I guess what I'm asking is like most of the interns are not athletic as you are, right? And
Yeah.
they don't have like most of them don't have like really like played in the NFL.
Yeah.
So being an NFL player and going back to intern, like what are your thoughts on like when you're interning under someone else?
Yeah. I think you got to make sure when you're interning under somebody else, that they have an affinity for wanting to develop people. You can easily go somewhere and intern and you just set up Gatorades, help clean, break down the racks, and maybe speak to one of the assistant strength coaches and never speak to anybody else. And that'll be a reference on your resume. It'll be a timestamp on your resume. We don't really gain anything from that. I was very fortunate that the first mentor that I was under, Kaz Gazadi, I thought he was one of the best leaders I've ever experienced in my life. Honestly, did more for my professional development than probably anybody next to my father. So just being under somebody that's willing to mentor you. I think going back to your point about being athletic, a former football player, I think those things are obviously a gift, but in the same token, they can kind of be a curse too. Because if you're overly relying on those things to expedite you through the field, in terms of you'll get jobs because you look the part or you can connect with the guys, you can lose sight of all the other things that are necessary for you to be successful. The education, the understanding of the anatomy, the understanding of the periodization, understanding acute to chronic workload, so understanding sports science, how it ties into everything, understanding nuances of nutrition. You can really get by on not knowing any of that because you'll get elevated so fast because you played football and you're athletic. And before you know it, you'll look up and you'll be at a D1 top tier school in the SEC, making good money in a good position, but you realize that your ceiling is now capped and that's all you'll ever be. And it's hard to go back and learn those things once you're well off and established in your career. So, my mentor, Kaz, did a really good job in making sure that I was on top of those things. And know that the stigmas that are going to play against you being a former athlete, know the things that most people are going to expect for you not to know. Get around other people on staff, learn these things, make sure you do it the right way. So I hats off to him, kind of molding me and starting my career the right way. And that has worked wonders for me, later down my career in the position that I'm in now.
Cool. Is that experience kind of make you a better leader? Because you talk about leadership, and I know we talk a lot. I feel like you are like really good leader or like a great leader when we
Thanks, man.
talk. No, no, for real. Like I feel like you're a great leader when we talk about a lot of stuff. And is that experience kind of help you become who you are right now, or like this leadership mindset, like helping people like grow something? Is that the thing that you always have?
No, I definitely think it was, cultivated by being around really good people, really good leaders. Like I said, Kaz, I thought was a really good leader. My dad was in the Marines as a drill sergeant for a long period of time, so obviously had that growing up. And then Reggie Scott and Justin Lovett in LA, I thought had another example of just like really, really good leadership in terms of what that looked like. And obviously my time at South Carolina too, a little bit. Uh, but ultimately, just pulling stuff from people, whether things you like or you don't like, or experiences you went through and not getting so far away from remembering when you were an intern or remembering when you were a player or remembering when you were an entry level coach and the things you yearn for or the things you wanted to get better at, or maybe something as simple as like a compliment that day. made, the last 3 weeks worth it for you, where you feel like, damn, man, I wish I did more here. I feel like nobody would even notice if I was gone. I feel like I don't do much. And maybe that one compliment from the head guy is like, bro, you've been crushing it. Keep doing what you're doing. Your input on this really helped. I want to give you more lanes to continue growing. Like that makes it all worth it. So I think a lot of times people will elevate into positions of leadership and almost forget what it was like to be an intern or be an entry level employee, or be a first assistant, and they forget those things that they wanted or they expected out of leadership. So I always try to keep myself as close as possible in that mindset and mentality to see, like, put myself, have empathy, and be like, what is my staff thinking? What position is this guy in? How's this guy going to grow? How do we create lanes of growth for this person?
So does that mean like being a director of performance, you besides like obviously you need to work with athletes and think about what's best for the athletes. So does that mean like besides all those stuff you need to consider, you also think about like how can you help the staff grow?
Yeah. Yeah, I think the biggest thing in order, in my opinion, to do that is to create models and frameworks that allow them to grow. The biggest thing that kind of paralyzes people is not having clear communication, not knowing, lanes that they should go down, and not having clear expectations in terms of like, what do you view as success for me as an employee working here? So I think creating clear guidelines of like, hey, this is our framework, this is our model, this is how we're going to do things, big picture. Now I'm going to give you full autonomy and shared ownership to go ahead and build out what that lane looks like. Go. But I think first creating those guidelines and those frameworks for staffs are critical, because then you allow people to show their superpowers. But not having those, or not creating those, or not having clear communication or expectation amongst people, I think it paralyzes people because they never want to overstep, or maybe they feel like they're doing too little or too much, but they're just constantly in limbo in terms of like, I don't know if I'm doing a good job here or not. So I make a big presence to just make sure that there's always clear communication, of expectations and lanes of autonomy for staff. Like, you guys are all directors of different spaces in this program. Here's the framework, here's the system, here's the model. You're a director of this lane. I want you to be a director of this lane. You're a director of this lane. All right. Speak to people, read the research, build on stuff that maybe you've done in the past, present it to the rest of the staff. And now that's going to be how we operate within that lane.
Cool, because one thing I feel like or I noticed that is really cool that you did is like we kind of talked about like organizing this podcast like I think it's last month or a few weeks ago. And you mentioned one of the guy, Eric, is it Eric Jornstorm,
Yeah,
right?
Justin.
Yeah. So,
Yep.
and you mentioned that he's really good and he do what like I think he programmed like what kind of work for you guys. And it is like for me it's like really cool that a strength coach are like probably helping other strength coach or like promoting like your staff,
Yeah.
right? Because a lot of times strength coach have this huge ego. They want to be seen and they want
Yeah.
to know, they want people to know that they are good enough or like they're really good. So, uh, talk to me about like this. I feel like you kind of, I don't know, maybe I feel like you kind of don't have ego to like reach out to people who you want to learn from and at the same time like help your staff grow with all these stuff. Talk to me about like these mindset.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, the word selfless comes to play, but you realize that like with a team of 90, or 50 in college, sometimes 130, like, you're not doing it by yourself. And you kind of recognize that too early on as an assistant, because how much assistant in your first entry level job, how much you did and how much you contributed and how much you helped. And obviously, whoever the head guy typically gets the glory for all of it, but you recognize how much goes into it because you're on the ground level with the assistant staff. So again, like going back to like, I never got too far away from that. Like I realized that this isn't a one-man show. This is a team. It's a team effort. And the things that we want to do and the models that we want to put in place, they're only going to be as successful as a team that's operating with them. So I'm always constantly going to try to get the most out of my staff, recognize that like this probably wouldn't be possible if it wasn't for these people. And there's a, I put a big presence on trying to hire people that are a lot smarter than I am, so we can audit one another. So I'm always going to try to push forward, like, hey, I think this guy's really good in this lane. If he wasn't, he wouldn't be working here. I think this guy does this at a really high clip. And a lot of times those people don't really get their roses, they don't get their flowers. But I'm going to do my best. Like if somebody created something and maybe I'm getting a lot of pub for it, like, hey, that dude wrote that. I okayed it. We looked it over. I added some small nuances so it could fit within what we do. But the nuts and bolts of this, he wrote that. So like hats off to him. Like I want to bring that guy to the table. Say like, hey, this guy's doing this really at a really high level. I think you should look into it.
Nice, because I feel like texting back and forth and talk about like your staff, the way you brought this up, I feel like I learned a lot from you at that's like as a leader, if that makes sense.
Thanks, man.
Yeah. So, uh, I'm gonna go back to like the sexy part of like training.
Yeah, let's do
So
it.
last year, me and Adam, we went on a trip to do like we used 1080 and force weight to test basketball player like XYZ axis of deceleration.
Yeah.
So basically, we use like counter movement jump, drop jump, single leg drop jump, and on the 1080, we use like 5 meter lead in decel, 10 meter lead in this decel, 505, and 5 meter lateral shuffle. And we got football team reach out to us. They say they want us to do the same thing. So, do you guys also use like 1080 to train like change of direction or like deceleration, those kind of stuff?
Yeah, so we've been trying to phase that a lot more into basically developing baselines for our roster. Organically, a lot of that will exist in training. Even though training's fluid and you're agile, we want to kind of build a protocol around what we want to do for baseline in terms of like, hey, what are we testing? What's the distance? What are the reps? What's the resistance? How often do we want to test this? How are we going to log this? But we want to start phasing that more into just like the first couple weeks developing baselines with deceleration, change of direction, and just acceleration. In terms of force plates, we've been doing that for the last couple of years, so we feel pretty good about our frameworks around that. But I mean, we're lucky we have 5 1080s right now, so we feel like we could probably do that in a training session. So we want to start getting more granular with that.
Nice, nice. So, um, do you feel like, because I feel like this is kind of new to probably, or deceleration is has gaining a lot of tension into like the strength and conditioning world. So, would you like, is it a thing that you emphasize a lot nowadays? Or like you mentioned, it is in the sport. So probably don't need to like heavily emphasize those quality.
Yeah, I think that, coaches that hang their head on they're good at what they do have been teaching it and orchestrating it for a long time. I think what has started to come up in the field is objectively speaking towards decel, like building parameters around deceleration capacity. But with that said, in terms of dropping the hip, good shin angles, making sure you attack and decel aggressively, shin angles, I think that's been coached for a long time. Some coaches do it really well, some coaches do it less effectively. At the end of the day, too, like underpinning all that stuff is like fatigue. Like fatigue and being out of shape is always going to lead to poor technique, which means my mechanics and that obviously are going to suffer regardless of what my capacity is. So first and foremost, I think we don't lose too much sight of like get the guys in shape, and that's going to clean up a lot. Not saying that that's everything, but you'd be surprised how many athletes are just not in shape, and now you pair that with faulty mechanics, and now you have a fire. So at first and foremost, like I said, that foundational block of the pyramid is like make sure we get the guys in shape and they can squat, hinge, lunge, rotate, push, pull, jog, stride, sprint effectively. Once we feel good about that, okay, let's start building some frameworks on top of this to like objectify capacity in some of these areas.
Cool, cool. I like it. I like it. I guess that's all the question I have for you today.
All right,
So for
man.
those who are interested in what we're talking about today, where can they find you?
I'm active on Twitter, underscore Coach Griffin. I know I should probably be active on Instagram. I don't really use it that much. I'll connect with athletes on it from time to time, but I would say that Twitter, now X, that I do interact with, and then a lot of people reach out to me on LinkedIn too, and I'm somewhat responsive on that as well.
Nice, nice.